Of the signs of prophethood. How could Muhammad, the illiterate man who grew up in an environment of ignorance, know the miracles of the universe described by the Qur'an, and which modern science is still to this day seeking to discover? It must then be that these words are God Almighty's. The true law. Islamic law does not differentiate between what is religious and what is worldly. It stipulates man's relationship to God and his duties towards God, and organizes them just as it does with a man's relationship with his brother. All God's commands and prohibitions in relation to religious, civil, and other matters are mentioned in the Qur'an. In the Qur'an, there are 6,000 verses or more, from which approximately 1,000 verses are related to legislation. Be simple. In the time of his greatest power, he, i.e. the Prophet Muhammad, maintained the same simplicity of manner and appearance as in the days of his adversity. So far from affecting regal state, he was displeased if, on entering a room, any unusual testimony of respect was shown to him. The eternal miracle. The miracles of the prophets who preceded Muhammad were in fact temporary ones, while we can call the Qur'an the eternal miracle because its effect is permanent and continuous, and it is easy for the believer in every time and place to see this miracle once he recites the Book of God. Moreover, in this miracle, we find a fulfilling reason for the formidable prevalence of Islam, a prevalence the reason for which the Europeans cannot understand. This is either because they are ignorant of the Qur'an, or because they do not know it, except through translations that are neither vibrant nor accurate. Abandoning worldly pleasures for Allah. Although Muhammad was a master of the Arabian Peninsula, he never thought of titles nor attempted to invest in that. Rather, he remained the same, only as a messenger of God and a servant of the Muslims. He cleaned his house himself and fixed his shoes with his own hands. He was as generous and giving as the blowing wind, not sought by the poor or the miserable, except that he granted them all that he had, which was usually a little and hardly enough. We do not differentiate between any of them. The Qur'an is the only book that recognizes all the heavenly books, while all the others reject one another. A mercy to mankind. This man, i.e. Prophet Muhammad, moved not only armies, legislations, empires, peoples, and dynasties, but millions of men in 1/3 of the then inhabited world. And more than that, he moved the altars, the gods, the religions, the ideas, the beliefs and souls. His forbearance and victory, his ambition, which was entirely devoted to one idea and in no manner striving for an empire, his endless prayers, his mystic conversations with God, his death and his triumph after death, all these attest not to an imposture, but to a firm conviction which gave him the power to restore a dogma. Philosopher, orator, apostle, legislator, warrior, conqueror of ideas, restorer of rational dogmas, of a cult without images, the founder of 20 terrestrial empires, and of one spiritual empire, that is, Muhammad. As regards all standards by which human greatness may be measured, we may well ask, is there any man greater than he? Read The Call of Islam. There is no doubt that Islam, which is a religion of science and knowledge, invites its adherents to acquire knowledge and act upon it. There is nothing surprising about that for the first verse of the Qur'an, which says, "Read in the name of your Lord who created all that exists." Passion for culture. Never in the history of civilization was there a movement more impressive than the sudden passion for culture that took place all over the Muslim world. Every Muslim, from the Muslim caliph, the Muslim ruler, to the workman, all seemed as if they had suddenly been hit by a longing for knowledge and a thirst for travel. That was the best thing, in all respects, that was introduced by Islam. Seekers of knowledge rushed to such centers as Baghdad, and then later to other centers that were the cradle of arts and sciences, similar to the modern trend of European scientists who swarmed universities seeking new knowledge. But it was even more magnificent than that. The miraculous Qur'an. I followed all the verses that have a link to science and nature and found that these verses are fully applicable to our modern knowledge, because I realized that Muhammad came with the explicit truth more than 1,000 years ago, before there were any human instructors or teachers. If any scholar, scientist, or artist thoroughly compares all the verses associated with a topic he understands well, as I did, he will undoubtedly acquiesce to the Holy Qur'an, that is, if he is a reasonable person, devoid of any dubious purposes. The best of systems. Islam prevailed because it was the best social and political order that the times could offer. It prevailed because everywhere it found politically apathetic peoples, robbed, oppressed, bullied, uneducated, and unorganized. And it found selfish and unsound governments which were out of touch with any of its people at all. It was the broadest, freshest, and cleanest political idea that had yet come into actual activity in the world, and it offered better terms than any other to the masses of mankind. The world is heading towards suicide. The West is now in great need of Islam, more than any other time before. Islam can give life a meaning and history a sense. It can alter the West's method of separating science from wisdom, thinking from the means and thinking from the results. Islam never erects a wall between science and faith. On the contrary, it ties them together as an inseparable whole. Islam can revive the hope in our Western societies, which are split apart by individuality to such an extent that they are pulling the whole world towards suicide. Scientific achievements. Islam has accomplished great scientific achievements over 8 centuries. Thus, it is a mistake to believe that Islam is just a carrier of civilization, or that Western civilization is entirely Western. Islam has to take a great amount of credit in supplying the West with the first rules that led to their achievements. Permeates life. Islam is the best religion for humanity. Islam permeates all areas of a Muslim's life, and also has the final word in each and every activity carried out by a Muslim. There is no religion other than Islam that has the potential to solve all the problems of the people in the modern world, and this is a feature which is exclusive to Islam. Constructive and not destructive. Again, Islam recognizes genius and individuality. It is constructive, not destructive. For example, if a landowner who is rich and is not in need of cultivating his land refrains from doing so for some time, his property therefore becomes public property, and according to Islamic law, passes into the hands of the first person who cultivates it. The greatness of Islam. Islam does not need our pen, however eloquent that pen may be. Our pen, however, needs Islam, with that which it includes of spiritual and moral wealth, and with its wonderful Qur'an, from which we can learn so much. Principles of morals. The principles of morality in the Qur'an are sublime. Morals of these nations which used to believe in the Qur'an turned away from it with the passage of time, like those nations who used to believe in the religion of Jesus. The most important result that can be inferred is the impact of the Qur'an on the great nations that complied with its legislations. Religions that have the same impact that Islam has on souls are very few. You will not find a religion which has such a permanent effect like Islam. The Qur'an is the pivot of life in the East, which is the impact we see in the most delicate affairs of life. Security, tranquility, and peace. The act of bowing and prostrating, which is performed in a Muslim's prayer, satisfies the soul with security, tranquility, and peace, as everyone starts his prayer by mentioning the name of God, the entirely merciful and the especially merciful, and it is concluded with, "Peace be upon you." A good life. If we want to be fair in relation to Islam, we should agree that in its teachings there is an effective force heading that pushes people towards good, and that life, according to the teachings of this force, can be morally impeccable good. These teachings require one to show mercy to all of God's creation, and honesty in people's relationships to each other, love and devotion, as well as to suppressing the instincts of selfishness, just as it is. It also requires other virtues as well. The result of all of this is that a good Muslim lives a life consistent with the most detailed requirements of morality.